And with the president blasting lawmakers, we get a response from two senators. Wyoming Republican John Barrasso, a member of his party's leadership team, and New Jersey Democrat Robert Menendez, who sits on the Finance Committee. Senator Barrasso, start with you. The president said he thinks Republicans must and will give some ground on tax revenues. Will they? Is there any room for movement?
No, there really is not. 9.1% unemployment. The worst thing we should do is raise taxes on anyone during economic times like these. We want to get people back to work. The way to actually increase revenue for the government is to get people back to work. A robust, growing economy is the way to have more tax revenue coming in, not by raising taxes in these economic times.
But the argument from the president, of course, is that unless we do that, we won't get an agreement, we'll have a default, and then that will be even worse for the economy and jobs.
Well, I think the president is making the economy worse in many ways, and wanting to raise taxes is one of them. A lot of the rules and regulations coming out of his administration is making it harder and more expensive for the private sector to create jobs. And as a Republican, a conservative, I'm looking for ways to make it cheaper and easier for the private sector to create jobs.
Senator Menendez, at the same time, the president referred to sacred cows. So does that mean that Medicare, Medicaid must be on the table? Should Americans be told to expect some changes to their benefits in the future?
Well, before we get to that, it just seems to me that only in Washington could taking away $21 billion in tax breaks to the top 5 oil companies is somehow raising taxes. Average Americans don't get those tax breaks. And certainly the oil companies will make $144 billion in profits this year's alone. Don't need that from the American taxpayers. Ethanol, which an overwhelming number of Republicans and Democrats supported in a vote about a week ago in terms of eliminating those subsidies to the tune of $2.5 billion, is another opportunity to stop giving tax breaks to an entity that doesn't need it and give the American taxpayer relief. So as we talk about sacred cows, it seems to me that those need to be on the table as well if we're going to be talking about Medicaid and Medicare.
Well, Senator Barrasso, what about that? Why are those kinds of targeted tax hits that the president is talking about, why are those unacceptable at the very high end?
People all around the country are already feeling the pain at the pump. They're paying about $1 a gallon more for gasoline than they did last year at this time. For the average family in this country, they're going to be paying about $800 more this year to fill their tanks than they did last year over the course of the year. So I don't think raising energy costs for American families, which is what's going to happen if the president gets his way with wanting to raise taxes, that's not going to improve lives for families who are trying to put food on the table. And people are noticing the increased cost of groceries as well and trying to get their kids off to school and clothing on their backs. So I don't think that raising energy costs is a way to go.
Well, Senator Menendez, come back to my question about Medicare and Medicaid as sacred cows, because I want to see where the lines are here on both sides. Should Americans be told by Democrats and by the president to expect that their benefits are going to have to be on the table in the future?
Well, again, if we are going to do that, it has to be in the totality. Republicans have a view that it is only their way or the highway. It is their view that big oil should keep all their tax breaks. And to be honest with you, to suggest that the cost of gasoline is going to rise because instead of making $144 billion in profits, the oil companies would make $142 billion in profits, it's pretty surrealistic in my mind. So yes, everything, spending cuts, defense cuts, looking at entitlements under Medicare and Medicaid, and revenues need to be part of the equation. But for so long as we have this ideologically driven, particularly in the House, on the Tea Party focus, that no revenue whatsoever, including eliminating tax breaks for big oil, eliminating tax breaks for ethanol, eliminating other tax breaks that only a very few Americans get to the cost of all Americans, that somehow is a tax increase, well, then we're going to be headed to a very bad conclusion here, because I have to be honest with you. If we do not meet the nation's debt obligation, then the consequences are going to be incredible in the marketplace. people will lose significant amounts of the values of their retirement portfolios and 401ks. They will see contraction by companies that instead of investing and creating jobs, they'll say, oh no, and I'm going to hold back, and we will put this economy back into recession. And that's what the Republicans are playing with.
Well, let me ask that to Senator Barrasso, because that the consequences question. I'm not hearing much room for compromise from either of you in this discussion. So do you accept what the president said, what Senator Menendez just said, that we are up against a deadline, that the consequences are rather bad?
We are up against a deadline, so it's good that finally the president has gotten involved and gotten engaged in this. The Democrats haven't brought a budget to pass the Senate in over 790 days in this country. Since the last time the Democrats passed a budget in the Senate, the national debt has risen $3.2 trillion. So I think it is about time that the president has gotten engaged. I want to work together to find a solution. But when the president says a balanced approach, I want a balanced budget. We need a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We need to, as a nation, live within our means. Families all across America have to do that. Many states balance their budget every year. We certainly do in Wyoming. It's time to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution.
Well, you both talk of urgency. I mean, and yet weeks keep going, and isn't that much time until August 2nd. Senator Barrasso, starting with you. I mean, wouldn't citizens at home be listening to this and wondering if there really is a sense of urgency in Washington? What do you say?
Well, there certainly is on my side of the aisle. I see that the president had a debt commission and essentially ignored it, and then the vice president had some talks, and finally now this past week the president has gotten engaged. He said that members should stay here stay here working. I wanted to stay here over Memorial Day. Signed a letter to Harry Reid, the Democrat leader of the Senate, as did all of my colleagues, saying we should be working on this today. He said, no, take a break, go home. That we ought to be working on this and finding solutions. And I think one of the ways to go is balancing the budget and committing us as a nation to balancing the budget, because you cannot continue with this kind of debt. It's irresponsible, it's unsustainable, and the ongoing spending is the problem. Americans, don't complain about being taxed too little. It's that we as a nation spend too much.
Senator Menendez, what's your response to the urgency question, and what people at home should think as they listen to this debate, as they watch the president, they watch what's going on?
Well, there's no question that there is a sense of urgency. We had over 200 economists, including several Nobel Prize winners, who said you must raise the debt ceiling or the consequences to this economy are enormous. The consequences to average Americans are enormous as well. Loss of job opportunity, recession, loss of retirement income, just to name a few. A global consequence if the United States defaults, which means reverberations even further back here at home. So, but look, slogans and, letters about staying in won't get us anywhere. What's going to get us somewhere is, as we did in 1992-93 when we had Bill Clinton in the Deficit Reduction Act. We had entitlement changes, we had some very significant spending cuts, and we had revenue. That created the first balanced budget in a generation, record surpluses, low interest rates, low inflation, and the greatest peacetime economy in over a generation. And there is an equation to do that, and we just need to get back to that equation again.
And just briefly, Senator Menendez, do you see any signs that could happen?
I am still optimistic at the end of the day that my Republican colleagues will come to understand that they cannot afford for the country to allow the country to default on its obligations. Families at home understand the consequences on defaulting on their obligations. The nation cannot afford to default on its.
And briefly, last word from you, Senator Barrasso. You have any hope?
Well, I do have hope, but the president wants a blank check and a new credit card, and I'm not willing to give it to him.
All right, Senators Barrasso and Menendez, thank you both very much.
Thank you.